Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Yesterday, it was all bad martinis for conservatives. Today, we flipped the script. All good martinis for conservatives. Good, and good for our faithful audience today. Jim, let's dive right into it. It's not the underlying story that we love so much, but the interesting combination of people who are in agreement about what they think about the big story that happened yesterday, and that's that Amazon has officially announced that its HQ2 is going to be split up into two locations, one in Queens and one in Crystal City, part of Arlington, Virginia, which will be renamed National Landing, which we can get to in a little bit. About 20,000 jobs in each spot. But the incentives offered to Amazon to move to those places were enormous. Tucker Carlson not too happy about this, and he's found a very odd political bedfellow for this.
For bestowing his grace on America's two richest cities, Jeff Bezos, who is the world's richest man, will receive more than $2 billion in subsidies from you, the taxpayer. Well, new Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had this to say today, quote, Amazon is a billion-dollar company. The idea that it will receive hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks at a time when our subway is crumbling and our communities need more investment, not less, is extremely concerning to residents here. Hate to admit it, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a very good point.
Then Tucker had as his guest Brian Brenberg, a law professor at King's College in New York, and he said it's all about a big political power play by Amazon.
Now he's going to put 20,000 more people right next to D.C. and Northern Virginia to make sure every time there's an issue that affects Amazon, he has boots on the ground in the halls of Congress, in the offices of politicians to get his preferences passed, even if it means consumers and other small businesses lose out. This is all about getting his hands on the levers of power.
And Jim, the Cato Institute on the libertarian side is coming to largely the same conclusion as well. Some in the business community pushing back on this say, look, this is pretty common whenever there's a competition for a company to come or to move. There's a lot of incentives offered, tax breaks and otherwise, and this just happens to be really, really big because Amazon's really, really big. But what do you make of the way Amazon's been treated here, and what do you make of the near consensus, at least from certain wings of all different parts of the political spectrum, that this was a big ripoff for the taxpayer?
You know, what's interesting, Greg, is we talk about the ever-heightening partisan divisions and all that stuff. This comes after Dan Crenshaw and Pete Davidson on Saturday Night Live. I understand Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz ran into each other at the airport and had this kind of friendly moment. John Podhoretz and Dan Bongino, hugged it out when they had into a disagreement. Bipartisan agreements are breaking out all over, Greg. Isn't it a wonderful feeling? And both taxpayers and the general public getting really screwed over by big corporations and state governments is the sort of thing that should have these people bring together the left and the right. As I wrote about it yesterday, this is a terrible deal. I thought it was bad for Northern Virginia, and folks up in New York are saying the same thing. Yes, you see this sort of thing happen whenever a big company contemplates moving it. We've had some people compare this to the Foxconn movement out in Wisconsin, and Scott Walker's administration offering them a terrific, the best possible terms they could. But this is on a really epic scale. All kinds of disagreements about, one, I think just the location is terrible. I think the incentives that our home state of Virginia has given them is just absolutely off the wall. It's more than $500 million. I know the argument is, because they're creating the jobs, the people will pay taxes, and that'll increase the worthwhileness. The other thing I want to observe, though, Greg, is that notice this is all negotiated by a Democratic governor in Virginia, a Democratic governor in New York, the Arlington City Council, which, by the way, is going to raise the hotel tax to pay Amazon to relocate. Okay? We are raising taxes in order to pay companies. That's not how government's supposed to work. That's not how taxation is supposed to work. That is the opposite of a free market system. That is the government, even more picking winners and losers in the market. There's one nominal Republican on the Arlington City Council. The rest are Democrats. It's a really weird moment of strange bedfellows, Greg, because it sounds like the New York City Council, which, let's face it, there's not a conservative bone in that whole bunch. but they're really up in arms about this, and they may actually, try to use their leverage to drive this out. I'm not sure this Amazon deal is a done deal. And the other great irony is that, someone pointed out, Amazon moved to the two locations that not only don't need them, but that the locals probably don't want them, and particularly if it's going to come at this kind of a cost. Look, Amazon can relocate wherever they want, but the idea that state and local governments should bend over backwards and give them unbelievable financial incentives to a extremely successful company owned by the wealthiest man in the world is just absolutely ridiculous. And Greg, I don't know about you, I just can't wait to read the Washington Post editorials against this.
Well, they did actually run a column yesterday worried about increased gentrification as a result of this. So I guess that's maybe fair and balanced. Over at the Washington Examiner, by the way, though, they applaud Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for issuing the smackdown to Amazon, but they say later in the day she went and sat in at Nancy Pelosi's office and demanded a Green New Deal. And according to her website, a Green New Deal calls for a carbon-free 100% renewable energy system and a fully modernized electrical grid by 2035. And so what we need is the electrification of vehicles, sustainable home heating, distributed rooftop solar generation, and the conversion of the power grid to zero-emissions energy resources. Bottom line, says the Examiner, it means Solyndra only on a much more massive scale. So they're saying Ocasio-Cortez is selective about what she thinks is worth the taxpayers' billions of dollars.
Yeah. Greg, that's the nagging doubt when you see these sort of right-left agreements against crony capitalism. Our argument is against the principle of it, right? The government's not so, whether we love Coors, right? Let's say Coors Brewery wanted to relocate and, they wanted to move somewhere. You shouldn't be using government to pick winners and losers in the market. It should be set by consumers. It should be set by market conditions. Government is not supposed to protect one company or one industry from other market forces. They're not supposed to show favoritism. They're not supposed to do that because, I don't know about you, Greg, this is how you get omni-consumer products. Which is, by the way, how Amazon would have renamed himself if they had relocated to Detroit. Also, the Delta City project, they also would have taken over that and also taken over law enforcement. So maybe there would have been some hope for Detroit if they'd made that choice. But just kind of separate from that, the fear is that when the left opposes crony capitalism, their real objection is like, no, you picked the wrong cronies. Right. We don't oppose it in principle. We just want the right cronies, i.e. Solyndra and companies like that, to be the big beneficiaries, not the general idea that they believe the government should be picking winners and losers. They just have very different criteria for it than the current, you could argue, corporatist class.
Jim, before we exit, we have to talk about renaming the neighborhood from Crystal City to National Landing. I don't know if Crystal City was actually a formal neighborhood anyway. It's the name of the metro stop, and it's certainly how people refer to that part of Arlington. National Landing is a reference, I think, to the fact that it's just north of National Airport. Conservatives might think Reagan Landing would be slightly better. Is this just a useless exercise in semantics? Do you like the change? Do you think there's something better that we should call that part of Arlington?
I would look. Somebody said they should rename it Reagan Landing. Out of the general conservative principle that everything should be renamed after Ronald Reagan. But the name would fit, Greg, because the planes at Reagan are practically landing on your head when you're walking around. Do they know that every 5 minutes during a conversation during the day in Crystal City, you have to, wait a second. So as I was saying, Crystal City, for those of you outside the Beltway who've never had a chance to visit here, you can kind of leave Crystal City off your list. For about 2 weeks, I worked for a company. Actually, it was a version of the Stars and Stripes that was located there. A lot of defense contractors, and it's good to be there because of the proximity to the Pentagon. Architecturally, it's just disastrous. The entire layout of all of the roads and access roads from highways, Greg, I don't know if you know this, a little known fact, it was actually designed by Picasso.
No argument there.
And by the M.C. Escher designed the stairways you use to get up from the sidewalk to the walkway, the walkways and stuff. So you end up on those stairways that just go up forever or something. There's the one kind of nice thing is that there was this underground shopping complex that you can use to get around from building to building when the weather is bad. I don't know about you, Greg. The last couple of times I've been in there, it looks kind of like, you ever seen a Mad Max movie where, like, civilization has collapsed and it's just very slowly starting to come back? That's what it looks like inside that shop, that kind of mini mall, underground mini mall in there. It's, look, if somebody said, hey, do you want to tear down Crystal City and completely rebuild it? I'm fine with that in concept. Somebody say there's really nothing wrong with Crystal City. An atomic bomb or two couldn't fix. But all in all, in terms of just the other thing is that the name Crystal City, again, maybe that, I don't know if that necessarily was the real problem with it, other than the fact that maybe it brings up images of Superman's Fortress of Solitude and everything being made out of crystals and stuff like that. It does not look like that. It's a very depressing office park. And, on paper, I don't mind doing it. It's just it's hard to get to. The metro station isn't very big. It's very straight. It's the sort of real estate choice you make, Greg, if you've never actually visited Crystal City.
Yes, there is no logic, or at least very little of it, in how that area was developed, it would appear. All right, for those of you not in the greater Washington area, enough inside baseball, we'll move along to our second good martini now. New York Times, President Trump was expected to lend his support to a substantial rewrite of the nation's prison and sentencing laws at an event at the White House on Wednesday afternoon. But opponents of the proposal were making a last-ditch attempt to dissuade him from signing on. Senators from both parties who hashed out the legislative compromise, which would invest heavily in anti-recidivism programs and lower some mandatory minimum sentences, have staked the bill's success on Mr. Trump. The president's support could give political cover to Republicans wary of appearing to reduce some hardline sentencing rules for drugs and other offenses. With his endorsement, they believe they could assemble a coalition of moderate Republicans and Democrats in time to move the legislation before the year's end and before the new divided Congress is seated. There are some conservatives who do not like this at all, like Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. Meanwhile, the Koch brothers and the ACLU are on the same side in favor of it. So, Jim, we'll talk about maybe the merits in a little bit, but they're obviously trying to get this done while the Republicans still control the House. So we're really talking about a month here, probably tops. What do you make of Trump perhaps jumping on here and getting a major piece of legislation done in the lame duck?
I like both the merits, and if you can get it done before the end of the year, go for it, because passing it in the new Congress would be a whole new set of challenges. Back in January, I went to the Koch brothers, the Koch network winter meeting. This prison recidivism program, or anti-recidivism programs, were kind of their top priority there. And you could argue this is kind of a libertarianish point of view, but they pointed out that some of the biggest strides you've seen in this and kind of the broader criminal justice reform effort were coming from places like Texas and Louisiana and Georgia, and places that were generally considered to be Republican-leaning and fairly conservative states. And there was an element of fiscal conservatism there, the idea that this was a way to save money, but I think it was just generally good policy in this idea of, okay, you've been convicted of a crime, you're going to prison. 97%, I want to say, of the people who go to prison are going to be let out someday. So the question is, what do you want them to do when they're out? What kind of life do you want them to pursue? And the goal should be to, once they've done their time, and it's important to emphasize, I understand this legislation involves sentencing reform, but the prison recidivism aspect of it was not designed to lighten sentences, or it's not designed to take it easy on criminals. The effort there is to say, all right, criminal, you've made a very major mistake and you put your life down the wrong path. We're going to give you opportunities to help get your life back on the right path. This might include getting your GED or education, mentoring programs, job training programs, things designed to prepare you for life after prison. And they pointed out how important at this Koch Seminar Network, the first 48 hours, the first 72 hours after somebody is released from prison, who do they stay with? Who do they meet? If you end up back with the same old crowd that you were running with when you got arrested, you're probably going to end up in a bad situation. If you do find yourself with family and a support network, a mentor to check in, you had drug treatment programs, you had efforts to kind of get you out of the bad habits that put you in this dark place in life, you could end up in a much better path. And that's something I think at left, right, and center, and everybody should be going for. So I know this has been a big issue for Jared Kushner. I know this has been a big issue for the gang at the Koch network, ACLU, even a bunch of, I don't know if necessarily Black Lives Matter, but a couple of the African American groups that are traditionally on the left saw this as an area they saw room for cooperation with the administration. So I hope this comes to fruition. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of haggling on the details and things like that, but I think this is the kind of ideas and programs that can do a lot of good. There was a big question of, could you get these kinds of programs to start pilot programs in federal prisons? A whole bunch of states have enacted them at the state level, and they've generally seen good results. In Texas, they've seen phenomenal results. When they were discussing why, you saw southern states leading the way on this, I kind of wonder, Greg, if you need a reputation of a Rick Perry or a Chris Christie, or kind of being seen as a tough guy, somebody who's always going to be tough on crime, if only Nixon could go to China, only tough on crime Republicans could enact these kinds of programs designed to help criminals, change the direction of their lives. So I think this is terrific. I hope it gets done before the change in Congress, and I think it'll be another major feather in the cap of the Trump administration if it can get done.
Any idea why the folks like Tom Cotton don't like the bill? Do they think it's too soft in terms of reducing sentences and so forth, or is there something else to it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a general sense of, even if you, whether or not it is constituting, and whether the sentence disparities, I know there's some who see that as, and the argument, this really amounts to trying to take it easy on people who've already committed offenses and things like that. Worth noting, there was this came very close to passage towards the tail end of the Obama administration. There was one senator who basically held up the works. That was Jeff Sessions, which made it very, when he became Attorney General, there was a sense of, this is going to have a really tough outlook, getting the Trump administration Department of Justice to sign on to this program. The idea that Sessions was the objection. I know in these sort of situations, and you don't want to make sure that this isn't, patty cake time for guys who are hardened criminals and things like that. But I do believe that there is some good that can be done here. And my suspicion is that, as long as you take care of the concerns of the skeptics and there are, safeguards, and, you only want to have proven programs working in here, there should be some room for an agreement there.
Two quick thoughts as we exit. If this passes, another big win for Mr. and Mrs. Kanye West. They got at least one pardon, and I know they've been lobbying for this. And secondly, with Jeff Sessions out now, and assuming this actually gets done here in the lame duck, I'm sure that future Attorney General Chris Christie will implement it fairly. That's taking you down a whole new tangent, isn't it, right there?
We're in a whole,
We'll let that lie until we have an actual nomination, and hopefully it won't be Chris Christie. Jim, let's move to our final good martini now, and this is one that is probably not very good news for Nancy Pelosi. Despite a glowing CNN profile and their efforts to tout her for her return to Speaker, Nancy Pelosi is facing a problem in that effort. Your colleague Jack Crow, National Review, two upstart House Democrats intent on preventing Representative Nancy Pelosi from claiming the speakership claimed they were 100% confident in their ability to elect a different speaker during a Wednesday interview on CNN. Despite the numerous senior Democrats who have already publicly thrown their support behind Pelosi, Democratic Representative Seth Moulton of Massachusetts and Philemon Vela of Texas claim there is sufficient opposition to prevent Pelosi's rise to speaker. Quote, I am 100% confident we can forge new leadership, Vela told CNN. The lawmakers are currently circulating a letter to their colleagues that commits signatories to opposing Pelosi's speakership bid, which they expect to release next week ahead of the November 28th leadership election. Here's the important sentence, though. It remains unclear, however, who the anti-Pelosi Democrats would elevate to speaker in Pelosi's place. So, Jim, we chronicled this during the primaries, these people who won primaries claiming they would vote against Pelosi, and maybe they will in the party elections. If it comes to the floor and they need to get to 218, she's going to get there. It's one of the reasons we talked yesterday about how a 40-seat pickup is a lot different than a 30-seat pickup. Nancy Pelosi's not good at a lot of things, but she's pretty good at demanding loyalty and counting votes. So, but it could be fun to watch in the meantime. What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I believe there are about 10 House races left that are still not resolved. This could make a very big difference because if, Democrats get all of those, then all of a sudden I believe right now it's at 34 seats, right? Well, if there's a 44-seat gain, then they've got a good, close to 20 above the threshold, and Hillary, there's a Freudian slip. Nancy Pelosi can, lose up to 19 of them. Say, yeah, go vote for Tim Ryan or whoever. It doesn't matter. I got my 218, and I'm going to be speaker, and that's fine. If Republicans manage to hold on to their leads in a bunch of these House seats that have yet to be called, well, then maybe she doesn't have that cushion. And the first, and people make, obviously there's a great deal of symbolism here. This is the first vote you take in the House of Representatives. If you were on the campaign trail and I will not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, and your first vote is for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, the National Republican Congressional Committee just licks its chops when it says that because they got the attack ads ready to go, right? You lied on the campaign trail. You said you were different. You said you weren't like those Pelosi Democrats. Then you turned around and you voted for him. What I think is really intriguing here is I kind of wonder, I wrote today about the emerging race between Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan to be the Republican House Minority Leader. been kind of quiet up until now. I think it'll heat up a little bit. Everyone kind of thinks that Kevin McCarthy has the strong advantage in that race. I haven't heard many House Democrats say, you heard a bunch of House Democrats on the campaign trail say, well, I'm not voting for Pelosi. You didn't hear them say who they were going to vote for. And I haven't heard any, I know Ryan ran in the past. I know there are a couple other folks who, periodically get mentioned, but I don't know who's the alternative, and for, maybe the argument that some of these newly elected House Democrats will use if they end up breaking their word will be, well, I thought there'd be better options than Pelosi. I think could be, the arm twisting could be delightful. I think seeing people explain away their use of, my guess is that Nancy Pelosi will be the next Speaker of the House. But if it's a, 34 seats, they needed 23. If it's a 12, 13, seat margin, and 12 to 13 or more of those, I believe there are like 16 total House Democrats who said, oh, no, I'm never voting for Nancy Pelosi. Boy, that could be really exciting, because once it's not Pelosi, then I think it turns into, at this point, it's a free-for-all. I don't think there's any consensus alternative to that. Now throw in the fact that Nancy Pelosi has said that the efforts to run other Democrats against her for Speaker amount to sexism. Ms. Pelosi, I agree. Greg and I have been denouncing the blatant sexism of Democrats for years now. And we did our part to beat them in 2018. It's just a shame you couldn't do more. Although I guess actually, technically, Greg, we could argue Nancy Pelosi did more to help House Republicans than House Republicans.
Nancy Pelosi didn't hang out for 8 years in the minority to just say, you know what? Okay, it's somebody else's turn.
Yeah.
No. Nancy Pelosi, assuming she becomes the Speaker, by 2021 will have been in the House Democratic leadership for 20 consecutive years. That's rarefied air right there, and she's been Democratic leader since 2003. She's not about to graciously step aside to Tim Ryan or to anyone else.
I believe it was a wise Illinois politician named Rod Blagojevich who said, to paraphrase him, the speakership is a valuable bleeping thing. You don't just give that away. So.
Man, every other modern speaker, assuming they weren't defeated like Tom Foley, just kind of fades away when things don't go their way. Newt Gingrich, Denny Hastert, and then he got put away. John Boehner, Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi just never leaves.
Next time we do an update on this, Greg, we should be playing the Game of Thrones. Saying at least the Republicans stab us from the front.
Yes, exactly. It's good to see some public Democratic infighting, though. That usually doesn't get a ton of attention. Any sort of Republican dissension is always front page news.
When it comes to internal dissension, they're amateurs.
That's right. Which we should point out, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer will be the leaders again by acclamation, even though Kyrsten Sinema said she wouldn't vote for Chuck Schumer. And we don't know yet who will be the Republican leader, but it'll either be Kevin McCarthy or Jim Jordan. And Jim has an excellent piece on that in the Morning Jolt today, so be sure to check it out. Jim, all good news today. Let's see if we can do it again tomorrow.
All right. See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. And tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.